My grandmother was a cop in Santa Maria in the late 70s up till the early 90s. A man calls in saying there's a 7-foot gray man at his door. So she responds and goes to check it out. The door is jammed. The man is screaming and she hears a loud buzzard. She slams the door open and the buzz is gone, and so is the man. There's blood everywhere. She calls for backup and runs around and calls his name. She hears what sounds like someone yelling, but someone is covering their mouth. She ends up finding the man tied up with piss everywhere. Investigators say that he was in that room for at least 4 hours. The man lives alone in the middle of nowhere, says he called the police about 5 hours ago and said that a cop was on their way. He reported seeing a 7-foot gray man with big eyes who did that to him. No footprints, no trace of any kind of invasion. My grandmother lost 4 hours somehow. The guy ended up taking his own life a few years later and leaving a note behind, warning my grandmother that, quote unquote, they are after him, and thanking her for rescuing him. This is still the craziest story I've ever heard in my life. So I know this isn't exactly what you're looking for, but it still scared the living hell out of me, and it does involve the police. One night I was talking with my friend's mom. She was telling me about why she could never in a million years live in a trailer. Here's the story. I was about 5 years old and my parents moved us out into this trailer on about 2 or 3 acres of land. My room was at the far end of the house next to my sister's and was only about 20 yards away from the forest. Anyway, on a few nights I kept hearing a scratching sound, almost like nails on a chalkboard. So I woke up my dad and he came in and verified that I was basically crazy and I was told to go back to bed. This went on for about 2 or 3 weeks until one night I was listening to the scratching when it suddenly stopped and my toy chest started moving away from the wall. I ran down the hall and got my dad, and he reluctantly came down to my room to check it out. When he flipped on the light, he saw a woman's head, looking like a crazed version of Gene Wilder, sticking through my wall where my toy chest used to be. This woman screamed at the top of her lungs. Not like she was scared, like she was trying to scare him, and proceeded to pull at the trailer walls and try to crawl through the hole. He locked the door and called 911. The cops came out and arrested the woman, who was stuck halfway in the wall and cut all over the place. She had apparently escaped a mental facility 4 miles away and had decided to burrow into the house at night. TLDR, crazy woman scratches her way into a trailer and gets arrested. My uncle, who was a cop, told me about a time he responded to a 911 call from a lady who called 3 times claiming that the clouds were following her. I'm sorry, I just had to read that story because when I read it I was just laughing my ass off, and I thought some of you guys might enjoy it. I promise the rest of them will be scary. My dad is a police officer and he was called to an old castle-like house on the outskirts of town. The man who called in was telling him about his daughter who was acting strange. She was talking in a deep voice and speaking in swear words and high-level vocabulary. She was only about 10 years old. She was ultimately acting extremely creepy. My dad told the man, "I think you need an exorcist," and left that house immediately. He's been a police officer for 12 years and says that experience of that girl was the most scared he's ever been. This comes from a guy who has seen people blow their brains out with a shotgun or get decapitated by a train. We got a call of trespassers at an abandoned hospital during the daytime. There was an on-site security guard who kept it secure even though it was shut down. They swore they heard footsteps and talking on the second floor over the past few days. They locked down the entire perimeter and called us out there. There was no way out. We went in there with 6 officers and started from the 7th floor, systematically checking every single room down to the bottom floor. There was no power, so we were lucky it was still daylight and there were a lot of windows. It was an older hospital, so they left old CRT monitors from the 1980s and 90s in there. It was pretty eerie and reminded me a lot of the first scenes from The Walking Dead. We cleared down the floors from 7 to 5 no problem. Once we hit the 4th floor, it started getting really weird. This was the hospital's storage area. Instead of the big spacious rooms, it was super cramped and cinder block walls. There were chain link cages all over the place with old locks on it. It seriously looked like a horror movie prisoner area where they locked victims up. It was also pitch black. The hospital was so big that we worked in 2-man groups on each floor, but naturally split up as the floors opened up more. The 3rd floor was a mental ward area, so the padded walls and pitch dark rooms started to get me a little bit nervous. The 2nd floor was by far the worst, the surgery ward. There were no windows, and again it was pitch black. On top of that, there were large, eerie operating rooms all over the place. In the middle of some of the rooms, there were large metal slabs where they would operate on people. In adjoining rooms, they had huge pegboards where they stored the surgery power tools. How did I know it was power tools? They had marked the outlines of various drills, saws, and other painful-looking devices. It was kind of freaky thinking about how many people had died in those rooms when they couldn't save them. I was definitely nervous clearing those rooms solo in pitch black with only a flashlight. We eventually cleared every single room on every single floor and found nothing. The security guards swore up and down they always heard talking and footsteps down the halls though. We pretty much swore off that place and said not to call us anymore. TLDR, police enter scary hospital with possible ghosts. While working as a police officer in remote Australia, we were forced to move on an elderly Aboriginal man because the other locals had accused him of witchcraft and other things. We drove him to his township, approximately 1.5 hour drive away. The other locals were terrified of him as he was rumored to be a witch doctor. We dropped him off and warned him not to return to town for 3 days. We turned the vehicle around and drove back to town, flying probably 100 miles per hour. It took about 45 minutes to drive back, and upon our return, we find the same exact elderly Aboriginal sitting in the street. To this day, neither of us can explain it. Maybe the locals had every right to be scared. My uncle works for dispatch in my town, and he recently told my family one of the weirdest calls he's ever gotten. He says that he had received a call from a landline one night, and when he answered it, there was only static on the other end. This happened 2 more times. Finally, he calls the squad to go check out the address from the caller ID. When the cops got there and walked into the house, they immediately saw that there was a dead body. The person had been dead for 5 months. The craziest part about it was that there was no electricity or any other utility working from that house. So there's no way they should have been able to get those calls into dispatch. But if they hadn't, who knows how long that person's body would have stayed there. I got called to a residence at about 11 p.m. out in the boonies. This was in Wyoming, so the boonies are really the boonies. The call was about suspicious activity. When we get there, we're told by the family living there that there were very strange screams coming from a creek area about 1,000 feet out. And sure enough, waiting on the porch outside with them for a minute, I hear it. It's very hard to describe what it sounded like. It was like a woman in very severe distress, but higher pitched, and each scream lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds. It never sounded like it was saying anything. It just sounded like a cry of sheer terror, and it repeated again. We tell the family we're going to go investigate, so we just walked down the creek since it was nice out. We hear about 2 more screams, getting louder as we approach the creek. By now, we're both kind of freaked out. There are 2 possibilities. Someone is getting murdered or maimed in the creek bed, or it's a wild animal. As we approach the creek bed, we hear no screams for about 5 minutes. We search around and find nothing, yelling at the top of our lungs for somebody to come forward if they're there. Then we hear the exact same scream behind us, exactly from where we came from. We get about halfway back to the house, and the scream comes so loudly, it seems to be right next to us. We frantically shine our flashlights everywhere and find nothing. No eye glints of animals, no rustling of bushes, just silence. We trace our steps back, and the scream comes from around the creek again. This time it lasted about 30 seconds and was much louder than before. Our retreat becomes a little more hastened. By this time, we were both scared shitless and verified with the family to call us again if they heard it. They never called, and we got the hell out of there. I still don't know what it was. As an avid outdoorsman, I know no animal makes a cry like that, especially one that can move so stealthily without being spotted by flashlights. Something else that weirded me out was that it was completely silent while the screams were happening. During summer in Wyoming, there's always some type of ambient animal sounds. Frogs croaking, crickets chirping, owls hooting, coyotes howling, etc. But there was nothing. Until we were leaving and the screams had stopped. Then a frog started croaking. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it still. Ex-UK officer here. A few years back, we were receiving phone calls from an elderly lady that lived alone. She was reporting seeing arms reaching through the walls in her living room and also hearing the sounds of screaming, wailing, and children laughing. I believe she was slightly confused and unfortunately might have been in the early stages of dementia, which naturally led everyone to believe she was imagining it. One day, we get a call from someone who is visiting her saying she has just seen arms come through the walls in the old fireplace. Officers turn up, and after a bit of digging around the fireplace, it turns out the teenage kids of the scummy family next door had somehow made or found a gap in the brickwork just up inside the chimney and were taunting this old lady by sticking their arms through and making ghost noises through the gap. They'd also been spraying deodorant into her house. It wasn't me who dealt with this, so unfortunately I don't have any details about what happened to the sickos doing it and whether or not they were prosecuted with anything. But let's just imagine the old lady eventually passed on, turned into a poltergeist, and then tormented them all into madness. Police officer here. I work in a large inner city district, very poor, lots of abandoned houses. We get a check the welfare run. 2 ladies had just gotten home. We're walking up to their house when they hear noises coming from the house just to the west of theirs. They walk over and claim to hear 2 kids, a boy and a girl, crying and screaming from the basement of the house. The house is vacant, a fact that the ladies knew. So they claim they start talking to the kids. The kids are screaming about how scared they are, and it's dark and they can't get out. So I get the dispatched run with a backup car. My dispatcher describes all these creepy elements in the run. I disregard my backup because I think this is a stupid run, a waste of time, and I don't want other officers' time wasted either. I arrive on the scene. The 2 ladies are flipping out. These ladies were black, which, coupled with the experience they had just had, made for some high drama histrionics at the scene. I thought maybe one of their kids had been kidnapped or some such. They were so wired. So I get them calmed down. I had to split them up because they kept feeding into each other's energy, and they'd all get wired up again. I was forced to ask for backup, which annoyed me to no end because this was still a bullshit run to me. So they repeat their stories, which matched up more or less perfectly. A common police tactic is to separate people when it comes to a criminal investigation. It wasn't intentional when I did it this time, but provided a little insight to their honesty on the occasion. So they were adamant about talking to the children, led me over to the basement window where they had a conversation with these children. Just a normal little rectangular basement window. They repeat the conversation they had with the children, said they talked to them for about 5 minutes, I listen at the window and there is nothing. To me, this run is still bullshit. I walk around the outside of the house, not really looking for anything specific, just getting a feel for the place. All the windows are secured, the doors are all locked up. No one is getting into this house, at least not without showing forced entry. I walk back to the window where the incident took place and notice one thing peculiar. The window is fogged over. There is condensation all over the window. It's summertime and that is a normal thing to see with houses with air conditioning. Except this house either didn't have air conditioning or it wasn't on. Thieves steal the copper coil, so a whole house AC is rare. And on top of that, it was the only window with condensation on the whole house. No other basement window, nor any of the first or second floor windows had any condensation. I made the huge mistake of thinking out loud about this peculiarity with the window, because the two women flipped their shit again. A lot of, "Oh Lord, and help me Jesus" statements were being thrown out. So at this point, I haven't heard anything from inside the house. I have a strange looking window in a house which is locked down tight. Private property, secure house. I can't make entry without an exigent circumstance. But does the claim that women heard the children constitute an exigent circumstance? That's out of my pay grade, so I get a supervisor to come out, which annoyed me even further. He arrives. I explain to him the situation. He authorizes forced entry. Quick aside, I love kicking doors in. It rarely happens, but can be fun, and usually is quite easy. This front door is heavily secured. It takes about 4 kicks, but I was finally able to break it down. The city will reimburse the homeowner for the damages. So this house is probably 100 to 120 years old. It's got the musty, dusty smell going on. Old wood floors, plaster walls, very steep stairs, and no electricity. I go inside and I'll be honest. I was a little creeped out, but I don't believe in anything paranormal at all. 100% skeptic. So I'm expecting either a homeless guy or nothing. And it turned out that it was nothing. The house was very clean for its age, and the process of being worked on. Drywall stacked on the floors. It was easy to check every nook and cranny, and there were no signs of anyone being there. I go back outside, advise the house is secure, no one inside, and I'm standing on the street in front of the house talking to my supervisor. We were just BSing about whatever, and while standing there, I look over to the house, and in the second floor window, which would be where the front bedroom was, I saw something cross by the window. I can't tell you what it was. It was dark and tall. Human in shape, adult human, but shadowy, or in the shadows. I'm not talking like a Slender Man type thing. I have no idea what it was. The only unsecured door to the house was still the front door I kicked in, and we were standing 20 feet away from it the whole time. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could have gotten past us and inside. So I take off running back inside the house. I'm convinced there's a squatter inside. I bound up the stairs and nothing. Nothing is there. Like I check everywhere again. Nowhere to hide. And that's it. I work dispatch. I received a 911 call from a frantic woman stating that there was a burglar in her home. The caller told me that she went out for a cigarette at night and when going back inside noticed the front door open a crack. She closed it and went to the backyard to have her smoke. It was there that she saw the basement light on through the window and saw what she described as a thin, tall white male with dark jeans, black jacket, scarf, and a ski hat with a pom-pom on top. Caller went back in her room and locked the back door, gathered her family in the bedroom, which was 8 to 10 feet from the hallway that leads to the basement. At this point, the police had been dispatched and arrived on the scene. Multiple surrounding towns responded to set up a perimeter. The back and the front were both covered, and the basement had bars on the windows, so all exits were covered. The police got the spare key hidden from the caller's directions that I relayed to them, entered the home and did an interior search which found no one in the home. The caller was very sure on what she saw and even could tell facial features. The caller had no history of mental illness and has never made a call like that before. She ended up taking her kids and staying with her family a few times over. Police cleared since there was no suspect and there'd be no way for them to get out if they were inside. On our next shift, one of the senior guys who had been there nearly 26 years told us he responded to a suicide of a young white male in that basement. Apparently, he had shot himself with his father's shotgun, which was in a case in the wall near where the caller described him standing and looking around. We all believed that she saw a ghost that night. Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick second and say thank you for all the likes, comments, subscribes, the feedback, and kind messages. I really appreciate it, and it encourages me to keep making more content for you guys. I know originally I said I was going to post about 100 videos this year, but I feel more motivated to go even beyond that because of you guys. So if you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to get updates on my newest videos. Thanks again.